What is going on, y'all? This is the second video log, the one that's following up on the first interaction. So Avi and I met up at a coffee shop right by my apartment, and we started off sharing those pictures of each other from high school. And so one thing that we both noticed right away was that we had both been kind of chunky in middle school, in the beginning of high school, but we'd had different experiences, him with running and me with swimming, that had helped us kind of lean out, and that ended up being socially important for us later on. And so we kind of bonded over that right away. Other than that, there wasn't too much going on in the pictures that we had available to us that you could really learn something from our high school experience. Most of my pictures were of school dances or maybe some stuff from the swim team. Most of Avi's pictures seemed to be of him clowning around with his friends. So I didn't make too much of that in the moment. I was ready to move on to the other questions, rather than sweat somebody about the high school pictures that they have. A typical day for Avi was, as he told me, getting up at 5:30 to catch a school bus that wouldn't get him to school until 8:30. He was in a rural district, and so it took a while to get everybody to class. So he had a long day that way. I was also up early, but that was mostly for sports practice. I could have gotten to school in 10 minutes if I wanted to. He said that while he was in school, there were 6 to 8 subjects that they were concerned about throughout the week, which was normal for us. So, mathematics, science courses. One thing that was kind of interesting was that throughout his school experience, he studied Hindi, English, and Sanskrit. And so I can understand why each of those languages would be taught. That there's 3 that were given serious attention is obviously different than most American schools, where you'll take 1 beyond English usually, and even that's not mandatory. I gave up on Spanish after 10th grade and didn't really reconsider that decision until lately. So because Avi grew up in a rural district and his father was a farmer, that had an impact on just how the school day went. So for example, the electricity would usually cut off at about 7 o'clock at night, and so he had to get all of his homework that was related to using a computer done before then. I could use a computer all night if I wanted to. His mother would usually pack him lunches and cook dinner. My mom couldn't cook a salad, so I usually just bought lunch on our lunch break, or I just packed out something really basic from the cupboard. Top 3 things that we were worried about in high school. So I was very concerned about what he was calling his board exams, and you'll obviously know more about this than I will. But there was a lot of pressure that he felt himself to be under when it came to performing well in these board exams, because they mattered as in a really kind of hyper acute way with which colleges were going to be eligible to apply for and to be accepted into. Apparently the competition to get into colleges in India is extreme. At least that was how Avi was describing it. He was a really strong student all through school, and so he often remarked on how he'd been in the top 5 or 10 or 15% of his class. And so he might have felt himself to be under particular pressure. He might have just been one of those people. I didn't really drill down into it. But the board exams, as far as things that were stressing him out in high school, that was a big one. And this question of how he was going to pay for school. And Avi loves motorcycles and cars, and he loves to work on them and to think about how to make them run better. But as he remarked, and this is kind of interesting, that a mechanic is not a job, so there's not sufficient status or pay associated with being a mechanic to have that be something that he's comfortable pursuing. That was a little bit different. And the reason I wrote that down is that in my family, there was never a sense that some jobs are beneath you. I truly believe that my parents would have been totally fine with me going into the trades, or I could have been a gardener for somebody, and they really wouldn't have cared as long as I was happy doing it. In the status associated with that job or the lack thereof, there was never any sense that it was a reflection on them. So it was my squandering my natural talent or their investment into my education, where I could choose to do something less rigorous that way. So that was interesting that he was so stressed out about performing well in these board exams and getting into a good school. When it became clear that he was going to be going to school in the United States, he had to approach his father about having his dad pay for it. And his father's not a wealthy man, so Avi understood that he was asking his father to assume a great burden to help him with his education. And that's something that I haven't had to deal with, and mostly because I'm on the GI Bill and my college is free either way. But as far as feeling pressure to really perform in school and to honor his parents' investment by going on to a lucrative and high-status career, it just ran through all of his thinking. The top three things that made us happy in high school. So Javi just loves motorcycles. Anytime I asked a question, or not Javi, Avi, excuse me. Anytime I asked a question that was remotely related to, what makes you happy or what do you want to do, how do you spend your free time, it was back to motorcycles, back to engines, back to working on cars. He remembered dinking around with his father's tractor as a younger man, and throughout his life, that's just been the theme. So we ended up spending a lot of time talking about cars. I was a little bit sensitive about probing about what romantic life was like as a teenager in India. I don't know why I was so antsy about asking. That can be an embarrassing question for people who haven't had much success romantically. It might also be a little bit forward, or in societies where sex is a little bit more, or teenage romance is a little bit less out in the open, maybe a little bit more prescribed than it is here. I thought maybe best to avoid that on a first contact. Big tester in high school, so we did talk about the board exams. He also took AP classes in India, which were important as far as securing college credit. He had to take the ACT when he decided to apply to schools in the United States. He struggled at first with the ACT, mostly because of the language barrier, but I was actually really impressed with how much personal initiative it took for him to track down the resources to help him with his English and to understand what was going to be on the test and how do you arrange testing times and how do I make sure that schools receive the scores and how do I just kind of monitor the whole process from far away, being first generation in his family to attend any college, let alone a college on the other side of the world. So he, the stories that he was telling me about as far as just reaching really, really deeply into his network to find people who had gone to school in the United States and really probing them for advice and further connections, took a lot of initiative, and I was kind of silently impressed by how far he'd come already. The big tests that I had to worry about in high school were ACTs and SATs. By the time that my junior and senior year rolled around, I'd always been a strong test taker, and so I didn't have test anxiety. I didn't really worry about preparing for them. I also had one eye on the military at that point, and if I was going into the military, my test scores were not going to be relevant, at least not right away. And so I experienced very little pressure or a sense of this is a kind of a climactic moment in my career. It was very much just like any other morning. So I'm a little bit spoiled that way, and then I don't struggle so much with test taking that it becomes an event for me. My own reactions during this whole experience, just impressed. Impressed was really what it kept coming back to. Abi had been very forthcoming about his mental states throughout his first 6 years at MSU, with being depressed and pretty much just sequestering himself in his room for the first year because he was so hyper-focused on his studies and not letting his father down, and having to navigate a language barrier on top of just challenging content in his classes really discouraged him from pursuing a social life that was going to be challenging for him anyway, being different and not speaking the language readily. It makes me appreciate just how easy I had it. I already did. I wasn't totally blind to this, but I did already appreciate how relatively easy my childhood was in terms of the obstacles that I didn't face and support systems that I did have. But this conversation with Avi just really underlined it, and I'm looking forward to seeing him again for our next interaction. We're getting a little bit late in the season for the farm visit, so we're still going to do something farming related. We need to renegotiate what that's going to be. But once again, we're coming up on 10 minutes, so I'm going to cut it. Until next time.